Okay, good. So now I would like to give the floor to you, the participants. We have now from now to 12:50. We have time to answer your questions, and we will really rely on Slido because it will be very difficult to open the mics to 440 participants. It will take a long time. So that's why we really are grateful that you are using Slido. And I also see that you have made good use of upvoting some questions that are important to you. And we will, of course, follow this and make sure that we address those questions that you find as being the most interesting questions. So I would just really start from the top because this is how Slido works. 27 participants have said that they are interested in an answer on this question that reads as follows: with the new format and the need to issue runway condition information all year, during the whole year, and not only related to snow or winter conditions, a change of name for the SNOWTAM would make sense. For example, Canada issues RSC, runway surface condition, NOTAM. So who would like to take the floor to answer this question? Just raise your hand, please, panelists. Could also be somebody here from the authorities and from the speakers from the industry, in case you want to raise the floor to answer this question. I don't see any hands here, but okay, Vasilios.
Okay, so good morning also from my side. Well, fortunately today I don't have a presentation like the other time, but okay, so this is not a new question, and I think the change of the term SNOTAM to another name has been discussed many years ago at ICAO level, and by that time it was decided not to change the name. It's confusing, but a change also, it might trigger changes to the systems that are supporting the SNOTAM distribution or the NOTAM distribution system. So it's not an easy case or a straightforward case. And it's better to be discussed at ICAO level because it has a global applicability. It's a valid point, but the only thing we can do is to address the issue to ICAO again.
Okay, thank you very much for answering this question. I'm sharing the Slido page, so you can all follow together with me how we are addressing the question. So I will mark this question as answered. The next question that has received the most positive votes, 23 positive votes, is the following question. And again, I would like to also invite the other panelists from the authorities and industry in case you want to answer that question. Just unmute your microphone because you're able to do that from the panelist side in case you want to answer the question. So that question reads, when having the runway chemically treated, it is physically damp, color of the surface is changed. In the new GRF, we have to issue code 5, wet. There are many pilots which have then problems accepting crosswind. This state prevails for days as long as the de-icing fluid is not washed away by rain. So that's a question I would assume that maybe somebody from the aerodromes or the authorities from the northern hemisphere, but also anybody else who feels they can answer this question should raise their hand. Who would like to answer this question on specificities with regards to de-icing and runway chemically treated? I think one of you had this in your presentations. I just don't remember who it was. Does anyone from the speakers here?
Yes.
Yes, please just unmute yourself. I cannot really see if you've raised your hand, so please just unmute yourself in case you want to ask a question.
So I mentioned this in my presentation. So we have the same problem. We had a period where we had more sunny days. We had no wet runway. We had dry conditions, but we had anti-de-icing fluid from the aircraft on our runways. And so we had to produce a runway condition report with the runway condition wet in our first cert from the lower runway designator. So we had in this case some problems with incoming flights and in combination with strong wind, so that there are limitations from the aircraft so that they won't land. So that's what we have in Düsseldorf, the problem. Sometimes, but only.
Okay, I think that was really good. Thank you very much, Jens, for answering this question. I think that answers the question, and we can move to the next one that I have marked it now as answered. The next one that has received 17 votes is with regards to the aerodrome rules on assessment of runway surface conditions, a specific rule, ADR OPS B037. In that rule says the aerodrome operator shall inspect the runway whenever the runway surface condition may have changed. Now the question is, does it mean that a mandatory physical inspection should be done every time? Yes, and I realize we also had another question on whether there is a need to have a physical inspection every time. Who would like to answer this question? I think this should be somebody from an authority or from EASA. Yes?
Yeah.
So Vasileos will take the floor, but also colleagues here, the speakers from the competent authorities, please also feel free to compliment EASA on this one.
Well, the rule says what has to be done. So you need to do an inspection, but does not describe how to do the inspection. So you have the option of the physical inspection or conducting an inspection with other means. So you have, for example, automated tools to do it. We have to be very cautious with the systems that are currently in use. Because you need to make sure that they are reliable and they do not provide information which is wrong or could mislead the flight crews. And I take this opportunity to also to tell you that EASA will work on this subject of the different type of equipment and how we can certify it or approve some type of equipment. But concluding on this, yes, inspection can be done also by other means, but not, for sure, not standing on the control tower and you check the condition of the runway. This one, I don't think that it's a very good solution. Thank you.
Yes, and we also have several other questions that relate to physical inspections, yes or no, of the runway. So I think with that, you've answered that as well. Colleagues from the competent authorities, the aerodrome inspectors that are on this webinar, would you like to complement the answer from EASA, or is that okay for you? No reaction, so that's fine then. Thank you very much. I would now like to move to the next question. We have now a couple of questions that have received a little bit of a less of votes, but still there's one that is quite technical and I would like to skip it. It's the one that's, but there are now more and more people find this one good. Okay, so let's go for it. That's the question that's on top, 18 votes. If all parts of the runway are equal, 555 wet, would it then be possible to report all parts wet via ATS?
Yeah.
Or for all parts covered with 50% frost instead of 555, 50, 50, 50, frost. So basically, it's a question about how should this be reported. The concept should keep the information to the pilot as short, as precise as possible. So this is a quite technical question, but it touches upon an important point, which is how are we making sure that the information that is provided is precise, but at the same time it is short. Who would like to take that question? Yeah, Augustine, please.
So good morning again from me. So it's linked with our previous slides. We have mentioned about the ATIS and length of the ATIS and length of the communication between the ATC and the pilot board. So this is somehow, from our perspective, addressed in SERA. So, and we have mentioned in our slide that we try to look at the ATIS message and how we can provide additional guidance. Here, probably I have a sympathy what is proposed here. However, as I said, potentially instead of all parts, I would rather use the old thirds because that's refer in the SERA, we refer all thirds, you know. So, but as I said, be patient. We try to address all these comments and provide some additional support on these. And it also needs to be coordinated in-house in EASA, so from the ops perspective and the aerodromes.
Thank you very much, Augustine. Is there anybody here in the room or from the speakers outside who would like to complement this answer? I don't see it. So that's good to know that the person who's here identified as anonymous has given us good food for thought, and that's exactly the sort of input we are hoping to get via this webinar. So thank you very much. You have already seen that our colleagues say, yeah, they have some sympathy and they will look into it. So that's really good feedback that you have provided to us, and thank you very much for that. And then there is a question from Ray. Has received 16 positive votes. We have a runway that is grooved, and GRF is a problem for us when it's raining. When the runway is wet, the companies are forced to apply restrictions, even the grip conditions, even so the grip conditions are excellent. Is it possible in the future that a runway agent declares an Arab to raise the RCR from 555 to 666 in the same way as a pilot? Who would like to take that question?
I will respond to this.
Okay.
Well, the pilot report always gives is a trigger for reassessment. Mm-hmm. So we have, for example, for there is an obligation for the pilot to report back to the air traffic services when braking action is not good as reported. And then this information goes to the airport, and then they need to conduct another assessment. Okay, we are talking about 2 consecutive reports. So only the pilot opinion cannot upgrade or downgrade a runway. That's for sure. It's a trigger for a reassessment. And because the system is conservative, well, sometimes the pilots, they may say, yes, it's better. They are not obliged to provide this information to air traffic services. They are obliged only to provide when it's worse. But then if this information goes to the airport, this does not prevent the aerodrome to do a reassessment. But you cannot upgrade the runway based only on the pilot report. It's a trigger. It's always a trigger.
Exactly, and this is to make the system stable. And Giovanni, you would like to add on that?
Just to complement here that for the fact that on grooved runways, the pilot may take a performance credit only if it has the appropriate data in the AFM, so it's not open to everyone to take credit on a grooved runway.
Okay, so if there is the data in the
flight manual.
Okay, good. So thank you very much for that. We will now go to.
If I might add some short remark to that as well. The decision was made that the performance margin and the safety margin imposed by a grooved runway would not be a safety margin anymore if it was used systematically. So that's why a wet runway will still be reported as a wet runway and the runway condition code 5, even if it's grooved.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much also for stepping in, dear speakers. You're always welcome to support us here. I have difficulty seeing if you raise your hand, so just like the colleague has just done, just unmute your mic and go ahead and support us in answering the question. That's really much appreciated. So we can put this question as answered. Then we have another question on the visual inspection, but I think we have already answered that. Then there is a question again with regards to different runway codes. When the runway is covered with 25% wet snow, we report the code 666. So the conditions are worse, but the RCC is better. Is this correct according to GRF? A question from Sino Rabek, LKTR Ops. So the simple answer is yes. Okay, that's easy. Good. So the answer is yes. Very good. Now, another question that has received some votes. We are now going a little bit more down, and I will stop from here, and then I will ask the colleagues if they found a question that they found particularly interesting that we should address. So this question also coming from Anonymous, 12 votes. For wet or contaminated runways with a coverage of 25% or less in each third, the GM in the Air Ops regulation shows that the runway condition code 5 should be used. But then the AMC in the aerodrome regulation states that a runway condition code 6 should be assigned. In the same scenario, when and how is this inconsistency going to be addressed? We might not have the answer on the spot. We might have to investigate because we're not going to open up the different rule books now. But do we have an answer? No. So we will take this on, and we will provide a written answer by comparing the different guidance material and AMC. I hope that you can appreciate that we cannot go into this detail right now. So now I would like to ask the speakers if they have a particular question here that they see in the slide or that they find very interesting and that they would like. They think it would be really good for the audience to get an answer on that question. So is there anybody here in the audience, in the speaker panel's room or also outside from the authorities and industry? Is there a question that you found quite interesting? Please go ahead and tell me which one it is so I can show it on the screen.
Well,
Basileus, please.
yeah, I have one question. I just found it. Yes, it's a question about the done by Christophe. I think it's you. I think it's for the time being is the second most popular.
Okay.
Talking about the unavailability of staff to do the runway inspections and how to produce the RCR reports and all these things.
Sorry, can you tell me where this question is? I cannot find it.
So on your screen is the third one. What are the what are the options for an aerodrome operator facing facing unexpected issues, temporary shortage of staff for runway inspection to produce an RCR through the usual channels, ATS, NOTAM. Would suspension of all parts operations be the only acceptable option in EASA's perspective? Well, normally this should not be happening, well, on at least in our regulations, we say that the aerodrome have to have adequate personnel to operate the aerodrome. but of course, we are human beings. We know that something can be done which is unplanned. We are not talking about planned absence of personnel there and leaving the airport with nobody there to inspect the runway. Well, I think the fair thing, in order to be, instead of giving a false information or giving an RCR which might not be valid, it's better to tell the pilot that we don't have report. We don't report. There's no availability of report, so the pilot can decide. It's better it's the safest way for the pilot. Instead of giving him wrong or outdated information. But this is something that we don't want to see.
Okay, good. I think that answers the question. Thank you very much. Colleagues here also from the ATM side or from Ops, did you find a specific question that you found was interesting with regards to the ATM regulation or the Air Ops regulation?
We have tried to answer yes, online, but I don't see anything really specific, you know.
Okay.
Most of them were related to the use of the 80s.
Yeah.
Another question which I found quite interesting, and it might it's also relevant to one that Giovanni responded about the grooved runways. There is one question about Mr. Glantz, and
Yeah.
it says, as mentioned, the type of runway pavement is irrelevant for GRF. However, pavements such as groove and high friction surface do improve safety operating on contaminated runways. Without an incentive, there are less and less grooved runways. Is there a study done that supports pavement type as irrelevant? I have to say there that the GRF is a reporting of the actual runway surface condition, is what you see on the runway. So if I go now on the runway and I see there is a heavy rainfall, I might see 7 millimeters of water. If you have a runway which is grooved or has the perfect slopes, the benefit you have is that you go faster to wet conditions. So contamination, the drainage is better and the water is drained faster. This is the only benefit you have. So instead of operating, for example, with runway condition code 3 or 2, you have standing water for an hour. For a good runway, if you have a heavy rainfall, you may operate with this condition in 15 minutes, and then because you have a good drainage, you have the runway becomes wet, and you have a runway condition called 5. So this is a benefit of a grooved runway and of a runway with good slopes, but does not impact the reporting, because as I said, the reporting is what you see.
Exactly. So it just means that the runway has the better, better ability to drain the water, and therefore your runway will not be in a certain condition for such a long time. Okay. So I think that was a good answer. So thank you very much, Johan, also for having asked that question. So I put it as answered. I think there was also a good question on, I think it had to do with the manufacturers of the aircraft, OEM. Yes, can you remind me where that was? I think it referred to Dassault. Yes. No. No, the question I mean is here from Joao Montero. We've asked our associated OEMs, Bombardier, Dassault, Embraer, and Textron, all using non-GRF compliant takeoff data sets, on the possibility of establishing a conversion between the takeoff RSDs and a GRF RCC. The answer was anonymous that this would not be possible. But that was not the question that you referred to, Giovanni.
No, but
Oh,
we can also answer
do you
this
have
one.
an answer to this question? Good.
Well, at the moment, the GRF concept is only for landing. We know that there are a lot of, let's say, there is a lot of interest from operators to use the runway condition report also for takeoff performance. And it is up to the manufacturers to develop the appropriate support and the appropriate performance data to do that. At the moment, there is no regulatory requirement in this sense.
Exactly. But there is no requirement. And then what was the question, Giovanni, that you were actually thinking of?
It's a question regarding whether EASA is doing anything to convince the major manufacturers to update their performance data and also the SCAP modules to support the use of the GRF concept. Well, again, the way the manufacturer supports the operators, it's how can I say it? How can I phrase it? It's a business between the manufacturer and the operator. We are in contact with some manufacturers. Some are providing very good support, some other less. And we, as far as we can, we are trying to convince them to do more for those cases where we are aware that there is a difficulty, but we cannot impose that.
Okay, but we are aware and
Yeah.
we are supporting, of course, in case you are an airline operator and you run into a lot of difficulties. Please continue to share this information with us. This is important, and our colleagues will take it up with the colleagues in EASA that are dealing with the OEM. Okay?
I pick another question.
Yes, please.
Because it's a clarification. Is it correct that the EASA assumes that every aerodrome operator falling under the basic regulation has to perform runway assessment to provide GRF? And if yes, why? Well, this is correct. But the reason I have to go back, I think, to the first, when we started introducing the GRF. The GRF is not something new. The obligation to inspect the runway when you have contaminants was there since, I don't know, maybe before I joined the aviation, some years ago, many years ago. What we changed is the method and the frequency of we provide the information, nothing else. It's not new. As a concept, was there. But based on accident data, research, all these things, we found a better way to connect the runway surface conditions with the aeroplane performance. That was the only change. The obligation to report the condition of the runway was there since ages. So nothing has been changed.
Yeah. And we now have a globally harmonized system.
Yeah.
Even so, some of the presenters said, is it really that global? Because yes, indeed, there are some differences maybe between the European Union, FAA and Canada, but still it is a global system where if you are a pilot flying in Europe or Canada or the United States or anywhere else in the world, you should have a common understanding of what it means when you get a certain assessment and to know what that means for your aeroplane performance. And this is, I think, also the major change that we now have. So I hope, Florian, this answers your question. So I put it here as answered. And now let's see if we have other questions that are now picking up more votes. In the meantime, since you realize how we are working with Slido, I still hope that everybody of you can access Slido. If you cannot access Slido, then please go to the chat of this webinar. I have put the Slido details several times in the chat, but you can also see it here on the top of my screen that I'm sharing here. You can actually see the GRF the code and the passcode for this Slido. in case you still have difficulties to access Slido. So there is one question. Which one should we take? On the snow temps, maybe, from Volodymyr Karpenko. But that's also quite specific. Let's go for this one. The new GRF snow temp does not include items identifiers in AFTN message that brings issues for automated validation of item T. Eurocontrol EAD suggests to implement the unique keyword for item T. e.g., it shall start with RMK keyword, allowing the system to recognize free text and to omit the validation. We have worked a lot on this snow temp issue since the implementation of TRF. So can we reply to this question now, or should we park it and to answer it in writing?
I understand at least few people that are present here, from the people that are present here, are aware of this issue. Yes, we know it's an issue that appeared, let's say, a year ago. We're aware of the difficulties that exist there, and we had some discussions with Eurocontrol EAD on this issue. The work, I would say, is ongoing, and I take this opportunity to, let's say, link it with some other questions that I have seen earlier.
Yes.
Concerning the use of certain words in item T that might need to be replaced somehow. So from our perspective, anything that could in fact make the life of everybody involved in this process easier is welcome. And in this context, we will further engage on this discussion to see what solution may be brought forward, and to, well, let's say, further facilitate the GRF implementation. So we'll take this into account.
So especially with regards to item T, you're fully aware. You will also now, you're realizing that this is causing several questions, but you are telling us that you are already in discussion with Eurocontrol, and that we hope that we will soon be able to provide more information on what the outcome of these discussions are. Correct? Thank you very much for answering this question. I realize there's some of you as participants, for example, I just saw something popping in from a participant called Ibrahim, that you're using the chat function for your questions. I cannot work with too many screens and also provide answers to your questions that you have put in the chat function. Please use the Slido. I am sharing my screen here. You can see how to access Slido with the right passcode and the right password. It should be possible to put your question in Slido, and we will also then answer all those questions that we were not able to answer right now in this open session. We will take our time, provide answers, and then we will upload our answers on the EASA website.
I picked up another question.
Yes, please.
Which I found interesting, the discussion about the grouped runways and the specially prepared winter runways. And I just want to clarify, because I've seen a question from someone saying that, unfortunately it's anonymous, it says, given that Nordic aerodromes were shown respected by a specially prepared winter runways, would it be fair to show the same respect to compact aerodromes using grouped runways by implementing more specially prepared wet runways in the ADR ops part? I explained in my previous response what is the benefit of having a grouped runway. The specially prepared winter runway, for those who have followed the whole process and have read all the documentation, the explanatory notes, the opinion where we explained why we did this thing. This is a specific type. We are talking about a new surface. We are talking about aerodromes where they have runways which are covered with ice, but they receive a very, very specific treatment. And actually, we have a surface which is not an asphalt or a cement. It's a totally different thing, but it provides good, very good friction. And since this has not been addressed at ICAO level, we consider important in our rulemaking task to discuss the issue and come up with a solution which is safe. And that was the reason. So we're talking about a totally different surface, which was not addressed at ICAO. And maybe Alexander, you can, or the other colleague from Avinor, they can say something wrong, more, but that was the idea behind.
Alexander and Ronnie, Alexander from the CA Norway and Ronnie from Avinor, would you like to complement this answer from EASA on why the specially prepared winter runways is something quite specific and cannot be compared to grooved runways?
I can only comment that it's two different things, as Stefano says. It's the specially prepared winter runways is similar to landing on dry asphalt because it's sanded and has very good braking action and can't compare with water.
Exactly. So yeah, we have actually, yeah. Yes, please.
I would like to add something to that. Heinz from Lufthansa. The differences, maybe in a nutshell, if an aerodrome went through a completely certification process, they are allowed to report specially prepared winter runways. And if they report this, a runway condition code 4, usually, if not downgraded, then any operator approaching this airport will be able to use this immediately and have the performance benefit. Now with grooved, it's different. Even if an airport would report a grooved runway, only an operator that has A, the data in the flight manual available, and B, fulfills a specific process of making sure that the grooved condition persists, will be allowed to use grooved data credit. So while specially prepared winter runway is free to all operators approaching the airport, grooved is not. So it makes sense to deal with grooved differently and not upgrading it to a dry runway if it's wet.
Thank you very much, Heinz, also from this clarification from your point of view, the air operator's point of view, where you fly to many different aerodromes with many different types of runways. And indeed, I would just like to add on the discussion on specially prepared winter runways that it also requires this prior approval of the competent authority. So I think this is something that in addition to that, you know, it's not something that any aerodrome can use all around Europe. Of course, you can use it because we have very specific rules which define exactly how that runway has to be prepared, including, as Vasileus and the colleague from Norway has said, with the specific grid, the sand. But we also, on top of that, we have a requirement to have a prior approval and a lot of data assessment going on in the background. But we put this solution there in the European context because we have many years of very good experience with specially prepared winter runways in Europe. And we wanted to make sure that this good experience can continue and that we can continue to enable aerodromes to remain open and to remain accessible, especially those that are in the northern hemisphere, for whom it is very important that these aerodromes are accessible, because very often you don't even have a road going there at all. So you are really reliant on air operations to make sure that those regions in Europe remain accessible. So it has also an important dimension from that point of view, that we make sure that European northern regions remain accessible to the citizens. Okay, now Is there another question that is less specific? And Luc Geimer, I see that you put your question in the chat, but it's just popping up and then going away. I cannot see it on my screen. I'm really sorry. Please put your question into the Slido if it's at all possible. There is a question with regards to ICAO that I would like to highlight. Is it the intention of EASA to work with ICAO ADOP and the Friction Task Force to propose changes to the GRF in the future? So are we basically content with what we have on a global level? Or do we think on a global level through ICAO, we would need to have further changes?
May I say?
Yes, but
I will report from my side. The issues that we have identified, some of them they have been addressed to the Friction Task Force, and we hope that the ICAO Secretariat, the leadership of the Friction Task Force will take them over to the ADOP. But also there are issues with the SNOTAM, but these are coordinated through a different channel. But our good experience, of course, will go to ICAO because it does not address, let's say, European specificities. We found some inconsistencies in the ICAO documentation. This does not mean that I have to say, because I have been involved in the majority of this of this process, that what it has been developed at ICAO was very good, and considering the extent of the changes and how many annexes and documents have been impacted, I think it was a tremendous effort. And I see in the audience here some people who were instrumental to this, and there was an excellent work. Of course, there are some minor issues we need to fix, but it's okay. Well, okay. We will address this right here.
And something that we can also consider is if we want to promote this idea of specially prepared winter runways, because it is, I think we can be quite, as I said before, proud of the solution that we have found in Europe, based on very good experience, and that's maybe also something to consider. I would like to take maybe 2 more questions, and I think then let me just see where we are with regards to time.
Well, we have only 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes left for the whole webinar, so actually we should not take any more questions. We should conclude the webinar now. Otherwise, I would have taken the question with regards to the different equipment and tools that are available, but we are going to answer this question. We are going to answer it in writing, the question from Ivona Leshinska on what are the different tools available, the different equipment types. So I think there are many and we can't list them all, but we will answer that question in writing. So now to conclude the webinar, and thank you so much for your questions. I hope this was useful. It can be a little bit frustrating when you're not sitting in a big conference room to be able to raise your hand, and it's also frustrating for us that we cannot directly interact with you and see you and listen to your questions live, but we think still that it was possible for us to reply to some of your questions, comments, and feedbacks. I would now like to hand over to Vasilios to conclude this webinar with some main conclusions that you have, that you see from this webinar, and then I will close the webinar. So, Vasilios, the floor is yours.
Yep. Just give. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. So the conclusions, I have identified well 5, 6 bullet points, which is the outcome, or let's say, of the today discussion, but also what we have seen in these 2 years. I will not go into details. So the first thing is that the GRF implementation in EU, it was a successful exercise. Despite some issues that we have faced, we have seen that everybody has worked on this, has contributed, they put a lot of effort. We have to consider that this happened also during the pandemic, that was also very, very challenging. And we are very happy that we made this happening. So I have to congratulate everybody around this table, the audience, and everybody that has worked on this. Of course, with the SNOTAM, we have some issues that needs to be resolved. I think we resolved many, and my good colleagues in ATM, they will take care of the rest. We have an issue, well, still it's not very clear on the applicability of GRF at aerodromes which are not falling under the EASA scope, although we provided some clarifications about the applicability of ATM ANS rules and the air operations rules. And another question that I picked up in Slido, and it came quite often, is what is happening with the upgrade and downgrade on takeoff only runways. Which is, we know that the runway condition codes are not very relevant for the takeoff runways, and how this information is reported if you have a takeoff on the runway, considering also the SNOTAM publication constraints where some fields are mandatory, and so there are issues. We need to think about this. Also, we've seen some comments, but also some feedback we received from other channels is that the reporting is not applied consistently, meaning that, well, we have identified cases where the report was not correct. Of course, this is in many cases, it's a matter of training. Another point that we picked it up is the length of 80s message. We addressed this. I don't know if my colleagues here in ATM will work further on this, but it was an identified issue. And the last is the use of different tools and equipment, and how these systems can substitute the physical inspection by a person. So these were the main points. As Julia said, we keep all the questions. We will respond to all the questions. Please give us some time. So don't expect something next week. We need some time because we need to coordinate the responses. And as we did in all other webinars, at least from our side, we will publish the information. We'll get additional
the videos as well, and the PowerPoints.
Yeah, and then you will be notified when there is the answers will be published, because through your registration you will receive all the updates. And what I have to say from my side is, again, thank you very much for your participation.
So then it is just for me to close this webinar. Again, I would also like to thank the speakers. We are very grateful at EASA. These regulations and support for implementation are not done by us from Cologne. They only work because you, the speakers, from the authorities, from the industry, you're working with us to make it actually happen. So thank you very much to Alexander Gumdal from Norway, Katrin Stoibli from Switzerland, Heinz Konrad from Germany, Lufthansa, Victor Manuel Samosa Pascual from AENA, Spain, from Jens Essers, also from Düsseldorf Airport in Germany, and also thank you very much to Ronny Andersen, of course, from Avinor, all the way up in Norway. And I would also like to thank our colleagues here from EASA who have supported us, and that, of course, is Augustin Klüss, Manolis Dardakis, Giorgio Cascone, and Giovanni Cima. And then a final big thank to the safety promotion team at EASA, Tom Norwood and John Franklin. Without their help, we could have never organized such a webinar, because this actually is not as much work as organizing a real event in-house, but still a webinar is also difficult to organize, and all the safety promotion that you have done to make to attract so many participants. So we still have 320 participants in the webinar, but we were 440 at some point. This is great. We really believe in this type of outreach and getting your questions. So thank you very much. We will answer all the questions. We will publish them on the website, and thank you so much for your support. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you.